What is up, fight fans? Welcome to the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. We are coming to you live from the number 38 presented by Volo. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at comments from the Peanut Gallery. We have a lot to discuss this weekend or this week for the program, ladies and gentlemen. But I do have to let you know, this is episode 199 of the MMA Plug. We are just 1 week away from our 200th edition of the MMA Plug, which will be going down next week, coincidentally, alongside International Fight Week. So we're going to have some great content for you next week, just to foreshadow that. But first and foremost, I want to give a big shout out to the crew here at the Mile High Sports Network. Make sure that you give them a look across all platforms here digitally. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button wherever possible. They are the go-to guys for all things in the core for sports. Naturally, with CU, there is going to be headlines galore with Coach Prime and the boys. This is the first season that he won't have his own boys, so see how he is able to manage the roster in that process there. NFL offseason headlines in full swing, mini camps, contract talks with some of these guys still in motion. You have in the NHL, the Panthers, they just won the Stanley Cup Finals. In the NBA, you have the OKC Thunder up 3-2 in the finals with Game 6 going down tomorrow. You have Nuggets offseason talk. That's going to be plenty of things to digest over the next few months there. And then we have the Rockies, 16-57. Atrocious. They moved that winning percentage up above 200 at this point, but still the worst team in the history of Major League Baseball. All that to be said, there is so many great things coming from the Mile High Sports crew here. I also have to let you all know that there is a big event going down here this weekend at the number 38. Come and check it out off of Chestnut down here in Rhino. There is going to be the launch party for the new magazine that's starting at 1 p.m. Right, Danny? 1 p.m. That's going to be down here at the number 38. Come and check it out. There's going to be specials going on. It's a great atmosphere over here at the number 38. TVs all over the place to watch games. They have great food, a giant patio with tons of room for activities. So much room for activities. There's lots of things to, like I say, lots of things to be had over here at the number 38 by itself, but then add to that the Mile High magazine launch party. Great way to spend your Saturday this weekend. Moving along from that, we have a Colorado rundown of some of the shows coming up over the next few weeks. If you have the opportunity, please buy tickets directly from the athletes. That is something that absolutely helps them in the process, that aids with their commission, so on and so forth, and their ability to build a platform for themselves for future opportunities and just to grow their base overall. This weekend, there's pro grappling show going down with Fight to Win. There's a litany of the pro grapplers who have competed on some of our shows, from CJJC to some of the other platforms here on the Front Range and in the Colorado area, that will be getting after it on that Fight to Win pro card. There is also going to be Guerrilla Fighting Championship making their promotional debut this Saturday down at the Pueblo Convention Center. In the main event, you have a couple of featherweights who are getting after it for that inaugural title in the, again, 145-pound division. A couple of long-time guys who have some major names on their resumes who they fought throughout the years. That is AJ Robb, who will be taking on Darian Robinson. A fight right there alone between two of the top featherweights in the state should be worth your price of admission. In the co-main event, you also have a guy who has experience all the way on the big stage with one championship to a decorated amateur career, and then again, a resume of a lot of tough opponents already as an early pro in the Steel City Kid, Nico Cornejo. Make sure that you check them out this weekend down there at the Pueblo Convention Center for Guerrilla Fighting Championship. Next weekend, a couple of shows going down back-to-back nights. Friday night, you have a Muay Thai show going down at the Stampede. That is for 5280 Muay Thai Fight Series. We're going to be getting after it, cracking the doors open at 6. Fights will be starting at 7. Come and check it out. It's going to be a great night of fights there at the Stampede. Following that, you have Battle MMA Championships happening on the 28th at the Colorado Springs City Hub. Couple of fighters and matchups on that card that I have circled that I say, you know what? That is a fight that on any card you would be blessed to see it. That is the matchup in the bantamweight division between Dylan Killer King and Samuel Henriquez. I mean, we're talking about that fight. That is two guys in the bantamweight division who go for it. They completely get after it in the process. Samuel has some of the most entertaining kicks in the state of Colorado. I mean, throwing spin and stuff. He's all over the place. He's continued to round out his game and has developed his grappling. Dylan Killer King, Killer Be Killed, coming out of victory in Colorado Springs. He was away for a little while. He's then since got himself back into the cage, and he's back in the fold here. He's looking to go out there and get his hand raised against a prospect who has a lot of steam behind his name. And on the flip side, you're looking from Samuel to go out there and have an entertaining performance against a tried and true veteran within this Colorado landscape here. Another fighter on that card who is, to me, somebody who everybody should keep their eyes on. He is the future of the game. He was one of the most decorated amateur lightweights from his tenure during this time in Colorado. Won multiple championships across multiple promotions. He's also got, 60, 70 plus kickboxing fights all around the world as a part of Team USA. And that's Relentless Chris Lalone from Team Chaos. Make sure that you check out that card, Battle MMA Championships. That is going to be going down on the 28th. And then a week off for the 4th of July. And the weekend after that, you have Sparta back in action on July 11th. Multiple pro fights on that card that you're going to want to sink your teeth into. We'll be talking more about that as the weeks get closer. Ladies and gentlemen, this one is a little bit more of an update. I guess it's something that I think struck us all by surprise when we got the news initially a few days back that Funky Ben Askren is in the hospital. Ben Askren is currently, let's just call it for what it is. He's fighting for his life right now. He had a bad staph infection that turned south and opened up the door for pneumonia to creep in. He is in the hospital right now, and he is the most recent update from his wife and from some of the people around him is that he is somewhat responsive. He has opened his eyes a little bit and has squeezed some hands, but he is still very much in a fight. And they are still they're basically at the stage that they're at. He's looking at a lung transplant. He is not out of the dark waters yet. Funky Ben Askren is someone who, again, one of the most decorated combat athletes ever. I know that his run in the UFC, and especially for those who didn't really know who Ben Askren was prior to that trade that happened with One Championship, they only really see those 3 fights that happened with Ben in the UFC, and you don't get a true picture of who he was as a combat athlete. When you talk about Funky Ben Askren, and when he came out of college out of Mizzou, a multiple-time Hodge Trophy winner, basically something that's unheard of. Think if you're a football fan, that's somebody who won the Heisman multiple times throughout their tenure. He goes on and he becomes an Olympian. Obviously, that didn't go his direction. He didn't place, wasn't a podium guy, anything of that sort, but still was one of only a handful of people that made the Olympics for this storied country of USA wrestling for that year, or for that Olympic cycle, I should say. Became a champion in Bellator, undefeated through that run. Goes to One Championship after the whole initial leaving Bellator to go to the UFC, then having the rug pulled out for him fiasco happened, and runs the table while he's over at one championship and is a champion of multiple times there. We're talking again about someone who, through his prime run, he just got to the UFC way too late. His body was way too broken down at that stage for him to really kind of see what he would have done in the height of things and in his prime. And also, to be fair, he won with a one-dimensional game at the highest of levels, all the way to the point to where he got to the UFC. So he never really was forced to evolve or forced to grow because he never had somebody beat him or challenge him to grow in that position. But again, somebody who is very involved in his community, especially with the Askren Wrestling Academy up there in Wisconsin, has helped impact a countless amount of lives in the wrestling world and helping out young fighters in their growth and their development. Think of what you will maybe for him for the personal side, but for what he was as a combat athlete, man, this guy really was one of the greats in his respective realms. And in terms of what he was going to continue to do for the sport and being an advocate, we may never see Ben on the mats helping people in the same capacity. We don't know how this is all going to turn. Hopefully, things switch gears and they're on the up and up for him and the rest of the Askren family. He's got young children as well in the mix. Him and his wife. This is a tragic thing all the way around, and the fight community is rallying behind you, Funky. Hopefully that you pull out of this, and within the next couple of weeks, we have another edition of Funky and the Champ where you're coming out and addressing the public and telling us about everything here in the process. Moving along from that, we have a weekend recap, or we're going to cover our show from Colorado Combat Club 24. We're also going to talk the events that happened down in Atlanta for the UFC. This last weekend for Colorado Combat Club 24, hey, adversity was the word of the week. We lost a few fights, unfortunately, leading up in the final days of the fight. Some of it mission issues, some of them injuries, and one of them a complete freak accident that saw our reigning Muay Thai champion, Javon Dale. He was unfortunately T-boned on the way to the arena where he was set to defend his belt against Isaiah Wright. He has fortunately been released from the hospital. Some injuries did happen in the process, but he's not in critical care, so we're thankful and grateful for that. And, hopefully the recovery process is as smooth as possible given the circumstances for Javon Dale, and we get that fight to be able to ran back here sometime in the near future. Along from that, I want to give out some accolades and some awards. We had Fight of the Night going to Austin Haverkamp along with Owen Schultz. This matchup between these two young bantamweights, these two kids are the future of the game. I've had the very fortunate pleasure of getting to watch them grow throughout their careers. They started off in the kickboxing world. Austin, I called his first fights when he was like 15, 16 years old. Owen was still a teenager, I believe, through his first kickboxing fight that I called some years back. Very early still by record in their MMA run, but not new to combat sports as a whole. The depth of skill that the two of these guys showed for being 19 and 22 respectively, that has to be something that if you are objectively looking at that performance from the two of them from the outside in, you say, man, the future is bright. If this is what a 19 and a 22-year-old bring to the table, get ready for what they have and the evolution of this crop of guys in the next couple of years, because, man, the future looks good when you have guys who are able to blend the striking with the wrestling, with the jiu-jitsu. They have the wherewithal to know that, hey, I might be down on the cards. I need to throw up this submission, and I need to be able to make something happen here. Well, the grit, the skill, and just the overall swagger and the confidence that these two guys had at such a young age, man, that's impressive. We had submission of the night also going to Austin Haverkamp. I mean, again, like I say, that was fight of the night where these two guys went at it for the first 2.5 rounds of the fight. Owen Schultz is in the top position, has secured that in the third round. Austin Haverkamp throws up a triangle. Austin Haverkamp traditionally, or through the majority of his run, has been a kickboxing and a Muay Thai specialist, but he has added some jiu-jitsu training out of Logos right down the street here, coincidentally from the studio here at Mile High Sports. But he throws up the triangle in the third round and is able to secure the finish. I mean, again, this was a fight that you were on the edge of your seat the entire time for these two. And kudos to you guys. Looking forward to what the future brings for the both of you. We had KOTKO of the night. This one was, there was a couple that I had some deliberation with amongst our crew, but just the dominance, I guess, of the overall performance. We could have, if we didn't call it KOTKO, we could have called this one performance potentially, just based off of the start to finish, the implementation of his game plan and being able to put it into effect all the way until the stoppage. And that goes to Lorenzo Grigio. Lorenzo Grigio, when you look at this kid, you say, oh my God, that's what an athlete looks like. I mean, you see that image, the meme of a shaved chimp. That's Lorenzo Grigio. This dude doesn't have an ounce of fat on him. He is yoked. His muscles have muscles. This is the pigment deficient Yoel Romero, if you will. This dude is jacked beyond jacked. And a couple of those ground and pound punches that he had once the action got down to the canvas, once his opponent Slayton, all due respect to him, once Slayton's head was up against the ground, the thud that came from the punches that Lorenzo rained down, no question why Armando Castro called a stoppage to that fight. Going to run through a couple of the other fights on the card to give you some results here. You had Seth Wilson picking up a unanimous decision victory to start the night. That fight, again, that was a back and forth battle. Each guy had some moments, but ultimately, Seth Wilson was able to pull off the victory. A fun fight. Two guys who were in their debut, him and Fernando Ornelas. That was a couple of guys who went out there and they left it all hang. Both were exhausted by the time that the fight ended. Both had worn some damage in the process. But again, a fun fight. Congratulations to Seth Wilson picking up the unanimous decision victory there in his debut. Second fight. This one was a candidate for fight of the night. You had Sam Skarberg and Mark Kondenko, and it was a slobber knocker for as long as it lasted in the first round. I mean, both guys had each other hurt. Both guys wobbled each other. Ultimately, in the end, Sam Skarberg was able to take the back of Mark Kondenko and picked up that rear naked choke victory. Again, this was a very close decision as an honorable mention for that fight of the night. A close one for KOTKO. The only reason why I didn't throw this one in there was just based off of it being a doctor stoppage as opposed to it being a stoppage from the fight itself, and because of the spirit of Michelle Lyons wanting to continue. You had Hannah Wagner picking up a big TKO victory in the second round over Michelle Lyons. Michelle Lyons was a dog. I mean, you want to talk about a gangster who went in there against one of the most feared strikers on the women's amateur scene here that Colorado has had for, I can't even say since when. I mean, for the entire time that I've been calling fights. Hannah Wagner with 4-ounce gloves, watch out because she's going to draw blood. I don't know that there's been a fight where she hasn't drawn blood in the process or put somebody out, for that matter. In the first exchange, she broke Michelle's nose, and it was a bloodbath from there on. Was also then able to open up a cut, I believe, above the left eyebrow, which ultimately resulted in the stoppage. But Michelle kept on coming the entire time, and she said in her post-fight statement that she knew what she was up against. She knew the threat that Hannah presented, and she wanted to go in there and really test herself. She didn't want to have an easy fight. She didn't want to have an easy opponent. Oh, she got everything that she bargained for. And, in that instance, I applaud her for being willing to step up to that test. And on the flip side, I applaud Hannah May for being able to keep herself composed and stay within the game plan. Also had a big hip toss in the process, showed that she's rounded out some of those grappling skills within her game. They had sparred at some point too. So the fact that there was some history and they were both willing to go take the fight, congratulations, lady. That was an entertaining fight to watch for sure. Joachim Dever won by unanimous decision. Another kid who comes out of that Genesis camp with a lot of potential. And then you had Alex Gutierrez, who won by a first-round leg kick TKO. That was a pro Muay Thai fight in the main event there. That sets up a big bout that we're going to have potentially here in a couple of months, depending on how another fight sifts out. So keep your eyes tuned for some more updates on that. Transitioning from Colorado Combat Club to talking about UFC Atlanta real quick over the weekend. We had UFC Atlanta that went down on Saturday, June 14th from the State Farm Arena. In the main event, you had Kamaru Usman go out there, and I think that Kamaru Usman showed a lot of people that you could stop all this talk about saying that I'm washed or saying that my knees are completely gone and there's nothing left, or I am past my prime. I am over the hill. There is nothing left for me to be able to move forward, or I am just going to be a gatekeeper and a building block for these young guys. Somebody forgot to tell Kamaru Usman that he's in his late 30s and that he was on a 3-fight skid. Because Kamaru Usman went out there and he dominated Joaquin Buckley. There's no other way to put it. He flat out from pillar to post dominated that fight. I mean, if you want to give one round to Buckley, go ahead. But we're talking a 49-46 clip on the cards. And I think that it really just went to show that Buckley still has a lot of holes in his game. When we're talking about guys at the top of the divisions and someone who is a decorated champion in the way that Kamaru Usman is, he is an expert at pattern recognition. And especially those around him, his coaches and his peers who are also of the highest of levels, they are also experts at pattern recognition. Well, what is something that we saw basically the entire time from Buckley the other night? Every time that Buckley would throw his left high kick, that's essentially when we saw Usman shoot. Buckley would throw his kick from the left side, and when he would reset square. Or when he would land and bring his feet back, they would both be square. That was the invitation every single time for Usman to shoot, and he was successful. He showed essences of the Usman of old, who pretty much went out there and took you down to the canvas, rode you out because you could not get out from him on top of you, and he gave a vintage Nigerian nightmare type of performance. Usman now says that he believes, well, this could be, something that puts him in line for a next title shot, given what his name, his resume, so on and so forth is. There's a lot of moving parts at the top of the division right now at 170, but a massive win and a dominant win at that, the way that Usman had. We know that the UFC is not averse to giving these former champions or guys who have the profile of his sort massive opportunities, especially given that they're kind of in a moment of needing some star power or needing some extra draw. Once this fight with Islam Makhachev and JDM happens in a couple of months here, I think it will be very intriguing to see how the booking goes for that next matchup. Bilal Muhammad was asking for that fight with Usman. Usman says, now, what does that fight really do for me? I can't really blame him there. But it is a storied fight from the aspect of you have two former champions who would be fighting. But Usman is saying from the standpoint of nobody cares about the Bilal fights. Why would I put myself in that instance? I can't fault him for that when there's some bigger names that he could potentially go out and beat if he has to fight one more before being back in the mix of a title shot. Again, by pure meritocracy, you would think that just 1-3 in his last 4, he's got a couple to go, but given his status, what he brings from a global perspective in terms of fan base and eyes and resume, call it for what it is. Again, the UFC will do right by a lot of their former champions or by someone who works on the desk with an analyst work, who has the title defenses that he does, and again, brings forth not just a country of viewership, but dare I say an entire continent of viewership, and would bring back potential gold for a massive segment of the audience. It's business, folks. I would not be shocked if that were to be something that happens. In the co-main event, we had a sweeping decision from Rose Namajunas defeating Miranda Maverick. Rose also had that big knockdown late in the fight. These are two ladies who have done a considerable amount of their training here in Denver. Respect to both of them in that process. I know that there's been some familiarity or some paths crossed at certain points in time. And Rose spoke about that in the post-fight press conference, that Miranda was much more willing to go after it in the fight as opposed to in the training room. She said that in the training room, Miranda was a lot more reserved, didn't take as many risks, but that was something that surprised her when it came time to the fight. I think that this puts Rose in a very nice position as far as, where she sits toward the top of that division. Rose said that there's a couple of fights out there that intrigue her, whether it be Natalia to she's already fought Manon. There's options that are for her on the horizon. And, Rose would love to be able to cap it all off with double gold at 125. A tremendous human being in her own right. I would like to see it, but that's a tough road to go right now, especially given what the timeline may look like with where Valentina is, with Blanchfield that's sitting out there, with Natalia Silva. There's a few different options again that are in play. The potential Weili super fight, we don't know. There's a few things that could go underway there at 125. Some other main card results. You had Edmund, the Golden Boy Shabazian, picking up that victory against Andre Petroski. That snapped Andre's win streak coming into the fight. That gets Edmund back in the winner's circle. Edmund is a guy who at one point in time was really thought of in the light of what his nickname spoke to. He was thought of as a Golden Boy. He was a very bright prospect who had ascended to the rankings at a young age at 185 pounds. But he took a couple of really bad beatings, and call it for what it is. He did have some considerable deficiencies within his game prior to leaving from Edmund Tarverdian of Glendale Boxing Club. Some of those holes he hasn't really completely overcame, but we did see some improvement in that fight against Andre. Hani Barcelos defeated Cody Garbrandt. It's a heartbreaker when we see Cody continue to lose and lose and lose. He's on a 1-3 skid of his last 4. He's got a couple of fights, left in his deal. He re-upped. He mentioned that during media day. But plain and simple, ladies and gentlemen, this is a far cry from championship level Cody. The damage that he's taken throughout his career, you could just see it alone in his physique and his body. He's not the same. He's a step slower. He's not the same appearance that he once was. He was a little bit doughy in the middle, if you will. He's still, by time, got some left on the clock. But when we factor in the 3 straight knockout losses that he took a couple of years ago, on top of a couple of knockout losses as an amateur, and then the known couple of instances of concussions within the gym, the issues with vertigo, the near life-threatening COVID episode that he had where he had considerable long-standing health effects with the blood clots and so on and so forth. No love, unfortunately, man. We've seen the last of Cody at a high level. And now it's at a stage of, this was a fight where if there were any for him to go out there and to try to capture lightning in a bottle, this was another Sun Tzu type of matchup that they were trying to set him up with in the Hani Barcelos. There were a couple of moments where his hands looked fast and he had some really good exchanges, but overall, it's not enough to continue to get the job done at a high level. All due respect and credit to Cody, because again, we spoke about it last week and many of other times on this program. That title fight victory where he earned that 12 pounds of gold against Dominic Cruz years back is arguably one of the greatest UFC title fight performances ever in history. That all being said, that guy has left the building and has long since checked out. A couple of other fights on the main card. Unfortunately for our friend of the program, Cody Brundage, lightning strikes in the same place 3 times. It was a wild firefight in that third round. An accidental clash of heads resulted in fight being stopped. Cody had a couple of other instances where, an illegal strike has ended fights prematurely. This one, I mean, sometimes in a firefight, things happen. I know that there were some folks who were disappointed or they weren't fans of the ruling of the fight, but that's the nature of the beast. That is how the fights are scored. And they said, especially, oh, well, there was a fight earlier or a different fight on the card that resulted in a different ruling based off of the stoppage. Well, some of this factors in based off of where in the fight did the infraction occur. That is the difference within these fights in this situation. This was an accidental clash of heads. However, it occurred in the third round. When something of this sort happens in the third round, you then go to the cards. If it's prior to the third round, then they're looking at intent and whether or not that is going to be scored a no contest versus a disqualification. That is the big difference there by the way that the rules are written. I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm not saying that I disagree with it, but that is the letter of the law as it is written for the scoring. You had Alonzo Metafield defeating Umar Sy. That was a unanimous decision victory there. But we'll talk a little bit more about this one later on. But you had capping off on the prelims, Paul Craig and Adolfo Bellato. This fight was ruled a no contest after the illegal up kick. Yeah, Bellato probably has taken that Oscar from Aljo on this one. I mean, I'm not sure how you can be fouled, have your wits about you to look at the referee in contention and complain, then seemingly completely lose all consciousness, come back to scramble with a shrimp and trying to pull guard in the situation against the referee up against the fence to sell it. Skeptical hippo eyes. Talk a little bit more about that later on. Michael Chiesa defeated Court McGee in a gritty, grisly veteran matchup. A lot of fans didn't like this fight. A lot of casuals, I'll call it that. I thought that it was a fun fight to watch between two veterans who both have a depth of experience that not a lot of guys on the roster can speak to. They're two former Ultimate Fighter season winners. You had Michael Chiesa, who won Ultimate Fighter season 15, the live season way back in the day between Cruz and Faber. And then you had Crusher Court McGee, who won Tough season 11, some years even prior to that, in what was the season of Chuck Liddell against Tito Ortiz. So that, just to give you the names of the coaches who were around in those eras, that speaks to the time in the saddle that these two fighters have had. That is a long and decorated resume for each of those two. And guys who maybe I'm a little bit close to the forest on that because I know them both personally and I like them. They're both good guys. Malcolm Wellmaker, though, I think was the guy who stole the show. Malcolm Wellmaker went out there and punched the ticket on Chris Moutinho, who was originally in the UFC, who came to notoriety for his fight against Sugar Sean O'Malley, where he pretty much walked like a zombie through the majority of the strikes of that contest all the way until the very end when that one was ended. But in this one, there was no controversy. I mean, Malcolm Wellmaker went out there and secured his second bonus in as many fights in the UFC. The young man was a pipe fitter and a welder down there in Georgia, got to fight in his backyard, walked out to Ule Do It from Waka Flocka Flame. I mean, the way that arena got behind that kid and the energy and just the sauce, the moxie, the swagger that he had walking out. This kid is a superstar in the making. He has that blue collar strength along with it. That feint that he had, he landed a couple of kicks to the body. Then the feint to draw the hands down and set the trap before he threw that hook that sent him face down, ass up. My Lord, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this kid, he quit his job just a couple of months ago after he made his UFC debut and won his first bonus. Well, that's $100K in bonus money alone that he's won in 2 fights. So I look forward to what Malcolm Willmaker has to go going forward, because this kid, again, he's young. He's got some swagger to him. He understands the flair of the business and putting on exciting performances and being someone who is engaging with the crowd and the fans. I cannot wait to see what the future holds for this young man. Jose Ochoa put Cody Durden out. Cody Durden, the hometown guy, was on the wrong side of the performance of the night bonus there. Ricky Simone and Cameron Smotherman had a back and forth battle in the bantamweight division. A little bit of a funny exchange. There was a lot of chatter going on between the two of them. Ricky Simone had Cameron Smotherman up against the fence and told him, "You're under arrest." And then Cameron Smotherman called him a racist. So, just kind of funny in that sense. Ricky Simone said in the post-fight press conference, like, I wasn't even taking it that far on erasing. It was just more so the position that I had him in. You had Phil Rowe pretty much giving you a street justice knockout against Ange Lusa. Hand posted up against his face, up against the cage, and just boom, 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 unloading punishment until Ange fell. And this was a big rally for Phil Rowe in that fight, because Ange was winning early on. Big Fresh Prince rally victory there. And then you had Jamie Lynn Horth picking up a victory over Vanessa Demopoulos, who filled in on short notice for that fight up a weight class. Guys, what did you think as far as some of the standouts for that card? I think that Malcolm Willmaker, again, that is a bright star in the making going forward. Let me know online. Hit me up on Threads or on Instagram. That's Jordan Kurtz at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Moving along from that to talk about this weekend's preview. Amidst all of the global things that are happening, what an interesting destination for this weekend's card for the UFC. It is going down in Baku, Azerbaijan, which, again, for those who might be living under a rock, I don't follow all too terribly much of current events or stuff outside of the fight world, but given the global conflict, and there was kind of conspiracy, if you will, that Jamal Hill wasn't making the flight amidst safety concerns. But Azerbaijan is right smack dab in the middle of all of this stuff that is going on with Israel, Iran, all of that. So definitely an interesting spot for things that are going down this weekend. I digress. You have a main event this weekend going down between Sweet Dreams Jamal Hill, the former champion, taking on former title challenger Khalil Rountree Jr. If you've seen Khalil Rountree's custom trunks for this weekend, or if you haven't seen them, I should say, go check them out. Certainly a very cool addition to some of these customizations. We all know I'm not the biggest Khalil Rountree fan. More so, not for his fight style, but for just the antics and him crying so many times over and over again. But as a fighter, man, this dude is, he's interesting. I totally understand why he has gotten some of the recognition and the praise that he has. As a fighter, this dude is somebody who is, at this stage of the game, he's must see. He puts on entertaining performance after entertaining performance. We could probably venture to say that we're going to hear about his overcoming of adversity 1,000,001 times this weekend, and so on and so forth. But on the flip side, he is the babyface to Jamal Hill's heel. Jamal Hill has been one of the most bitter personalities on social media ever since he lost at UFC 300 against Alex Pereira. Well, this is a chance for him to go out there and have some redemption. An extremely tough fight. I mean, the matchup, I don't think that it is a good comeback fight for Jamal Hill. But then again, when you're somebody of his caliber, his echelon, his resume, you're only going to get some of those top-notch, decorated killers who are going to be coming after you, because the UFC wants to either put you back in the limelight as the former champion, or they want to build somebody else off of your name, image, and likeness. Jamal Hill has the power to put anybody out on any given strike in any given sequence. On the flip side, Khalil Rountree can do just the same. And Khalil Rountree's Muay Thai has just evolved matchup after matchup. And I think that his volume striking is going to present issues for Jamal Hill in this matchup. What do you guys think, though? Let me know online. Some of the other big matchups on this card, you have the co-main event between Rafael Fiziev taking on Ignacio Bahamondes. This fight, I mean, you could say that this is a main event on any given fight night card. You have two guys with an entertaining striking style that alone is worth the price of admission. Ignacio with highlight reels of the spinning sort to Atma Fiziev enter the matrix. Two of the most elite striking specialists that the 155-pound division has to offer right now, current date in 2025. You get this in a co-main event matchup for free this Saturday. You have the matchup between Kyoji Horiguchi taking on Tagir Ulanbekov. This is a matchup between a couple of top flyweights. You get to see, a fun matchup just a couple of weeks ahead of the title fight, and the top-ranked matchup with Brandon Royval taking on Josh Van at International Fight Week. You have Denver's own Curtis Blades taking on Isvan Kuniev. Kuniev, a standout of the Contender Series, looking to make his splash into the division against somebody who has the decorated resume of Curtis Blades. Hey, Ryan for the hometown on this one. USA, baby. Let's go, Curtis Blades. You have also on the card another guy who's done a considerable amount of training out here in Colorado. You have Mohammed Motor Usman, brother of Kamaru Usman, who's going to be taking on Hambi Abdelwahab. An Egyptian Olympian. He's going to be taking on a former D1 football player in Usman. This is going to be an interesting matchup for Usman because we have a guy who has some very skilled grappling and is going to be able to match him strength for strength. I think in a lot of matchups so far, Usman has been the more athletic or has been the stronger guy, to where if he isn't able to get the job done with his hands, he can body up on you and play the positional game off of the fence. I don't think that that's going to be a route to victory that he has this weekend. So styles make fights. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. Given some light shed on the undercard before we transition out of this here, we have a matchup that I think might steal the show on the on the undercard from the lightweight division. You have a matchup between Nazim Sadikov taking on Nicholas Mota. Nicholas Iron Mota, one of my old roommates. He has a highlight style waiting to be uncorked. It's a matter of, does Nicholas trust himself enough to let those hooks get in motion? A Muay Thai specialist, the big hooker, as we've seen in his wins in the UFC, when he lets his hands go, he has devastating power. On the flip side, you have Nazim, who is a well-rounded mixed martial artist who he wants to do everything that he can to disrupt the rhythm and the timing of Nicholas Mota. Mota has been spending some time over there in Thailand training over the last couple of months. He looks to be in top physical shape and ready to go for this matchup. Again, this is a styles clash. And if you see the Brazilian Muay Thai specialist get into a rhythm and start to let his game get underway, that switch kick is lightning fast. And the way that he can jump into that hook and put you out could be very well a highlight that we see early on the card. Moving along from that, just running short here on some time, I want to talk about the Adolfo Bellato situation, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, when we want to start talking about flops and acting jobs, this might be one of the tops that we've seen across the board. Now, I do want to offer that there was an actual foul that was committed, but the performance that ensued from it, that was certainly something that was quite the spectacle that drew the ire of many across the board, including his peers on social media. But I do want to ask you all the question, where does that sit amongst some of the top flops that we've seen in the UFC? Just running down some of the acting jobs that we've seen through the years, one of them being the aforementioned matchup of Aljamain Sterling against Petr Yan. We had the infamous Josh Koscheck incident against Paul Daly, which resulted in the Paul Daly frustration of him punching Koscheck after the final bell. Paul Daly then gets released from the UFC, never fought there again. Ed Herman a couple of years ago, faking the nut shot. You had Kamaru Usman against Colby Covington in their first title fight. Again, the questionable groin strike in that matchup. You had Diego Sanchez versus Michel Pereira down in Rio Rancho a couple of years back with the Diego Sanchez famous, "If I can't continue, I win the fight," right? That clip that was caught on the hot mic. You had, this was prior to the UFC buyout. It was in the WC run, but still within that family of of companies. So something that's worth mentioning: the Mike Kyle versus Brian Olsen stomp incident. You had Charles Oliveira against Nick Lentz. You had the Alan Belcher versus Patrick Cote incident. Tim Sylvia against Jeff Munson. Randy Brown and Cowboy Oliveira. And then the fight of Volkan Oezdemir against Ilir Latifi. So let me know what you guys think. Where does this sit amongst the list of flops / acting jobs that we've seen in the UFC? Rounding things off here to go 3 rounds to close out the hour, what you've all been waiting for. I got my man Danny Bailey behind the boards. First round. What do we have?
All right, Jordan, in the newest installment of the John Jones versus Tom Aspinall saga, Dana White is now saying that he's prepared to move on from the fight if it comes down to it. Also, Alex Pereira posted a video of him on the scale weighing north of 240 pounds. Is this foreshadowing?
I think that Dana White's comments with Jim Rome on his recent appearance, stating that John Jones has been one of the most interesting individuals to deal with since he's walked in the doors, has again kind of furthered what we spoke to last week, that Dana's starting to have some frustration with the situation. And this is the first time that he's mentioned moving, like truly giving some mention and some weight behind moving on from that fight. Jim followed up by asking him, what are we looking at? What's the timeline here? Dana said within the next couple of weeks, we will have some answers for sure. Following from that, or from those comments, within the last, I would say, in the last few hours, we have the post from Alex Pereira this morning, who showed him on the scale at 243 and change. Well, that's a pretty sizable heavyweight in that matchup. I still think that from a styles perspective, that's a hard fight for really anybody against Tom Aspinall, being as big as he is, as fast as he is, as athletic as he is, with the grappling that he has, along with the devastating power. But when we're talking about a lack of star power, and especially a lack of stars in the heavyweight division, if you don't have that fight of John versus Tom, there's not really a major name, I guess, if you will, or somebody who lights up the marquee for your potential heavyweight championship. Pereira could do that, even though Dana has hinted that he doesn't really want to see that fight. Well, the circumstances and the status quo has changed if John Jones has removed himself from the equation. We talked about it earlier. This is a business. What might potentially bring in the most money? That fight in the heavyweight division, I would argue to say, if John Jones is not involved in the picture, the next biggest fight is absolutely Tom versus Poatan.
Highly touted prospect and former Bellator superstar Aaron Pico has officially signed to the UFC and is set to make his UFC debut against Movsar Evloev on July 27th for UFC on ABC 9. Is this a good debut dance partner?
It is as tough of a debut dance partner as he could possibly ask for. One thing that works for Aaron Pico in this scenario is that he does have such level 10 FU type of power. And Evloev, as shown in the Diego Lopez fight, he can be touched. What does Pico do? Is Pico able to put him out with that? That's going to be a very interesting question to see once it comes down to it over there on Fight Island on July 27th. The one thing that, if we're looking at it, though, from this perspective, if Pico comes in and wins that fight, he sets himself up for a potential title shot right away. Evloev it's a very big risk for him, being a guy who most believe by true merit should be getting the next title shot. But again, the issue with Avoyev is, do people know who he is? I mean, if I don't give Danny the phonetics to say his name, we're in complete left field over here. We're just basically we're playing hooked on phonics if we don't have that option. That's an issue when we're talking about potentially putting the strap on somebody. The UFC factors all of those things in. It's not to say that, oh, if you have a hard name to pronounce that they're not going to give you a title shot. No, but it's a matter of, are you branded well enough so that the public can recognize who you are and that you are the champion, especially in a division that is oozing with talent and has a lot of star power up at the top right now with guys like Volkanovski, Yair Rodriguez, Diego Lopez, so on and so forth. That's why we're most likely getting that Alexander Volkanovski, Yair Rodriguez fight. And this is basically, to me, confirms that that is what's going to happen for that September card. You're going to get Volk against Yair if it wasn't Bavzar in the process. That all being said, Pico is also in a tough position in that some of his Bellator peers that have recently made that transition over to the UFC, being Patricio Pitbull, Patchy Mix, they've laid eggs in their performances and in their debuts. The bright lights and the effects of the UFC is something that has shown that, hey, there are some levels, there are some differences in the process. If he comes in and lays an egg, well, then that's another fraud check that the fans can just go on and say that, oh, well, those guys were all B-leaguers in the first place. On the flip side, Pico, though, stylistically, and I think that he's more rounded. He's a more well-encompassed guy in terms of the skill set that he brings. But he's a little bit more Michael Chandler style. He's going to go in there, and when he uncorks those big bombs, if he lands, you are going to the shadow realm. It's not like you have to rely on, not trying to knock Patchy in the sense, but Patchy is a submission specialist. So he's got to rely on being able to get you down to the canvas to be able to get to where he works best. Aaron Pico has to be accurate, or he has to be correct and precise with his timing for one shot. He has an entire highlight reel of one hitter quitter type of knockouts from his tenure within the Bellator world. So again, I look for that to be an exciting matchup of two very, very skilled and talented guys at 145 pounds. A tough debut, but that will also give us a strong indicator of where Aaron Pico is in relation to the field in that debut fight once it comes time on July 27th.
Conor McGregor back in the headlines after a nightclub altercation in Ibiza where he was caught on camera throwing two punches. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel for the fallen golden goose of MMA?
I mean, what do you say? This is just another, and when you think that it might get to a rock bottom point, it just continues to go down that path further and further. Conor threw a couple of punches at a nightclub in Ibiza. This doesn't bode well for what he's trying to accomplish in his political run to ever possibly being back in the fight space. He hinted at it a few weeks back, and we spoke to it. Put the fork in the fight career. It is done. The fat lady is singing on that. In terms of life, I think that the only way that we see any sort of reprise or any sort of true change from someone like Conor, who has the money and the resources that he does to basically, that's why we call it having FU money. He can say FU to every single situation. He doesn't have to follow the regular rules in most cases or have to abide by a code when he is an owner of so many companies where there are all these sources of revenue coming in that he doesn't have to answer to a lot of people. But where some of that may actually change is, does Conor get prosecuted to the point for any of his transgressions that he actually has to do some time? I think that, unfortunately, is going to be the only way that Conor McGregor really has any sort of actual measurable change within his conduct. He's going to have freedom taken away from him in order to make change, because we've seen that going through civil suits. We've seen that these little slap on the wrist infractions where, he maybe does a few hours in a holding cell for the various crimes throughout the years. That is not getting through. That is not creating any sort of urgency for change in conduct or approach to life for the notorious one. Unfortunately, it is probably going to take something very drastic for his behavior to finally change. But I don't know if there were outside of that, if there's any other way that you see Conor having a turnaround or a return to a favorable light with most. Do you guys see any sort of alternative for the notorious Conor McGregor? Let me know. Hit me up on social media. That's on Threads or Instagram at Comments from the Peanut Gallery, on Twitter at Peanut Podcast. That wraps it all up for us, though, this week, ladies and gentlemen, for another week of original combat sports programming here at the number 38 presented by Volo. You can check me back here next week, same time, same place. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports.